Hi, and welcome to CFE Media's virtual training week session on digital transformation and the future of industrial software technologies. I'm your moderator, Gary Cohen, with CFE Media and Technology. So we'll get some business out of the way here first. CFE has met the standards and requirements of the Registered Continuing Education Program. Credit earned on completion of this program will be reported to RCEP at rcep.net. A certificate of completion will be available for each participant to download upon successful completion of a test at the end of the presentation. As such, it does not include content that may be deemed or construed to be an approval or endorsement by RCEP. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to learn today. As the new normal and future normal emerge, we're seeing manufacturers and digital plants accelerate their digital journey. Now, these companies are innovating under pressure, despite disruption of supply chains and labor. New regulations and safety measures are enforced in all industries, and global visibility and remote control and management are no longer a nice to have, but critical. Now more than ever, the power of digital data is being called upon to keep manufacturing and digital plants safe, high quality, efficient, and operational. In this session, we'll discuss how new and emerging industrial software technologies are changing the way companies will address these challenges, allowing companies to be more agile, especially as it relates to adapting to the new protocols resulting from the pandemic. The learning objectives we'll cover in today's presentation. We're going to examine how operations analytics are more important than ever, and how users need to think in terms of capabilities, not products. We'll learn how the boundaries between the automation layer and the manufacturing execution layer, MES layer, are blurring. We'll understand the democratization and analysis and analytics software. We'll understand the democratization of analysis and analytics software with specific capabilities embedded in the human-machine interface, supervisory control, and data acquisition, or HMI SCADA layer. We'll look at HMI SCADA best practices and trends to help industrial users who are more demanding than in the past and now expect a great user experience. For a seamless online experience during the presentation today, here are a few tips to help you out. Additional resources can be viewed and downloaded on the left-hand side of the screen below the session's agenda. If you'd like to take notes within the session, just click on the left panel labeled Notes, and you can do that. Please remember that this session will be made live on October 18th at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. The question and answer session will start at approximately 10:45 a.m. Central, 11:45 a.m. Eastern, or immediately after the presentation ends if it runs a little longer than 45 minutes. The answers will be archived with the session. You can see the Q&A details in the Meetings tab on the left-hand side of the screen. Zoom invite details can be found in the Additional Resources tab under Q&A Session. So if you actually want to watch this session again, that also isn't a problem. The session will be available on demand. If you're experiencing difficulties, please log out and back into the session to continue. And finally, you can achieve continuing education credit by passing the final exam at the end of this session. Attendees are eligible for 1 PDH credit for this event, airing on October 18th, 2021, and it's categorized within the technical, health, and safety, including core technical category for RCEP. This event is a live educational session presented on October 18th, 2021, and on demand afterward. Now we get to the fun part. Before turning to our presentation, we'd like to share a brief video from today's sponsor. And now we just sit quietly for a second, as if a video is playing. All right, welcome back. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Ranbir Saini. Ranbir is the Senior Director of Product Management for Automation Software at GE Digital, which includes the industry-leading iFix and Simplicity HMI SCADA software used by thousands of organizations around the world. Ranbir has nearly 20 years of experience delivering industrial automation, operations management, and media content creation software to OEM, municipal, and enterprise customers. He has a passion for designing compelling and innovative solutions in the physical and digital space that make a meaningful difference to customers, human experiences, and society. Outside of work, this passion has led him to venture into architectural design, such as residential houses and doors. He's also been chasing his ongoing pursuit of creating the perfect cup of chai, which we might have to talk about later. Ranbir, welcome to today's virtual training week session. I will now happily turn the proceedings over to you.
Thanks a lot, Gary.
Sure.
Share my screen here. All right, so let's get started. So, as Gary was saying, there has been a lot of change, in our space, in the industrial space. We'd expected about 2 years ago, all the things that happened starting with COVID, and what that has done to our organizations and systems. That comes everything from like supply chain issues, having to go from one day making beer to the other day making hand sanitizer. Even if you look on top of that, what we're seeing now with even climate change and how all these things are truly do affect industrial operators across the globe. And so with that, what we're really seeing is when it comes to our customers, is they're seeing that they need to think differently about how they run their plants and how they leverage the systems and the data coming from the systems. And so there's this big shift happening, and there's been a story about digital transformation. We've been hearing that for multiple years, but with these changes, it's really pushed the organizations to try to accelerate that change of digital data to help with things like cost, waste, safety, and quality. And a key part of that journey is really leveraging automation software. If you think automation software, that is where data comes from. If you look at something like HMI SCADA, the name itself is supervisory control and data acquisition. And so it's really critical to get that data, to be able to start the digital transformation, to really stay competitive and be able to meet the needs of your customers. And one thing I want to kind of start this journey on, we're going to discuss today, is really like the starting point really comes back to, if you think traditionally on the left-hand side, the way you would think about systems within a industrial world and within a plant is you have the sensors, you have the automation layer, you have SCADA and MES and ERP, and like it's one system pushes data into the next system. What we're really seeing now is with these new needs for trying to do things better and all the challenges and having to be more agile and adaptable, is kind of this blurring of where that data sits, and this kind of pathway is changing, where it's now that more and more the need to have like what I like to call like a data bus or like a data hub, where all the data from these different systems are all accessible in one place and there's context across them. And so this is really causing a kind of a change and a shift in the way you think of these systems being more now, they're all driving to this central data hub and information to be used for optimization. And so, once you have that, and data is not very good unless you can visualize it. And so once there is the idea of a data hub or this idea of having all the information, it's really critical of how do you actually get your workers to see that information, use that information in the most effective way. And so to try to articulate that, I just want to quickly show this visual here. And you can see on the left-hand side is a traditional PID view that an operator would see. And, like what you'll see there is there's a lot of color, there's quite a bit of information, there's even things like gradients. And, if I asked you, where's the area of focus on the left-hand side, I'm guessing most of you would not be able to tell because everything's kind of seems consistent, but there's colors everywhere. There's not an area to focus. But if you look on the right-hand side, what you can see now is like, there's clear delineation of areas of focus using colors, using information hierarchy. So for example, like having a top area that kind of gives you that key statistics, having left to right type screens or right to left if you're, depending on the country you're in, but really a way to actually have visual indications of what's most important for you to be most effective. And really this is the journey and the goal of high performance HMI. It's to make information much more easily digestible by the operators and the users. And so why do that? So the key thing here is really about helping users be able to spend less time trying to navigate through the systems to be able to do their jobs most effectively. It's being able to, as I mentioned earlier, find critical information needed, especially when there's a normal situation, as effectively as possible. And of course, with those normal situations, say for example, alarms happening, you want to move as quick as possible from identifying a situation to being able to actually find the relevant information to act upon it and then fix the situation as well. And so, we've really seen that by having high performance HMIs that make interfaces a lot more accessible and digestible for users, they can be way more efficient. And then to take that one step further, you go from accessibility and having the right screen. It's like, where do you make that screen available to users? Traditionally, it would be like a panel connected to a piece of equipment. But more and more, especially with COVID, it's important now that that information is accessible no matter where you are. And so it's really, really critical. And one piece of that is like, as I mentioned, is just having that information accessible anywhere, anytime, on any device, having that great experience that we just discussed, but also making it customizable for that specific user. So, depending on role, depending even on accessibility, you want to cater the interface for the task at hand for that specific user. And I think that that's really a change and a shift. But the other piece of that, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning, is also being outside of the plant. And more, we saw with COVID is that the need to, for example, even if it's a water treatment plant or it's a manufacturing plant, is having users, the operators, have accessibility or subject matter experts doing support outside the plant to be most effective. And it's when you look at that in the context of the bigger picture of why, it's about things like, how do you actually use your staff most efficiently? How do you increase that response time to any situation? It could be a normal situation, but also, as I mentioned earlier, it could be actually supply and demand. Maybe there's a shift in what you want to produce or what you need. Like maybe you have to increase water usage, right? Or it's because there's a shift in the products that customers want. And so you want to have that response time to be faster to actually make those changes within your environment. And then lastly, while doing all this and with all these changes and having to be more agile in production, you also want to still continue to be compliant to industry and government regulations. And, and we have really partnered with several customers on this journey, especially at the starting of COVID. And so here's some of the results we've seen with some of those customers. And so, one thing they mentioned was like the speed of troubleshooting. They were able to reduce the time it took by 40%. And again, as I mentioned, they were able to then react faster. They had better visibility into what was happening at one plant and across the entire enterprise. They're able to be then more agile to make adjustments or changes. And lastly, but also as important, was they were able to increase safety. A simple example of that is, I talked to some customer, they discussed how they would have like a shift change meeting with multiple people. Usually, that'd be all close together, huddled together in one place. But they started using like technologies like phones, and they actually had people being further apart, but being able to use their mobile devices to be able to see each other and still to effectively have those types of meetings. And then this transition and change is going even further than just tablets, mobile devices, accessibility, and remote. We're seeing even increasing adoption of augmented reality and virtual reality. Specifically, in certain industries I think have been more quicker to adopt, like automotive and medical equipment. But the real reason here is a couple of things. One, I guess I would mention is, one thing to say here is that I don't expect, and it's not realistic that people are going to wear these types of headsets like for the entire shift. It's more about when certain situations occur. For example, like, hey, it's new staff and you want to train them most effectively. And this is a way for them to actually be trained where they can see the actual equipment or the product that they're working on, to give guidance when abnormal situations happen. So, something that they don't normally do day to day, when something that's out of normal, this is a way to make sure that they're most effective and there's no like safety issues, or they're doing the right process to be most effective. And lastly, let's say, for example, you have now a smart manufacturing execution system or automation system, and it detects an issue. Using these types of augmented reality to actually help the operator pinpoint where that issue is and actually visually depict where that issue is. And so that is part of the journey of, from the end user perspective, who is actually acting and operating with the actual software and equipment. Another key piece of this to really be truly agile is the development platform. And so this idea of rapid application development. And what this really means is creating an environment to build these types of applications, which don't require software development skills. Really, they call it like low code, no code. The idea being that, you have a WYSIWYG interface, you're able to quickly browse data, build a screen, be able to actually give that in the hands of users. You're able to even do things like testing that screen with users, validating it in a kind of a lean mindset, and be able to improve it. And that, really will help in regards to making the best screen possible, but it also helps in, again, the time it takes you to respond to change. And one of the other critical pieces of doing that is also having things like structured data. And so, what we have seen as we worked with customers is if you have the ability to start creating structures like models. So if you think of a model like a pump is a type of model, it's a type of equipment. There might be different vendors of pumps, but you can actually define a pump, and then you're able to reuse the screen you developed for any type of pump, for example, or even doing pump comparisons for efficiencies. So those are the type of constructs that will really help in regards to building screens more efficiently, but also consistency for the end users across the entire plant and enterprise. So I just wanted to give an example of this as well. So one of the customers we've been working with was a water operator. And as COVID hit, they had challenges when it came back to safety. Like, how do they actually give control to operators when they can't all be within the plant? And at the same time, they want to ensure that they did this in a manner that those operators can be using standard procedures and they can be effective with that. At the same time, even in these times, you're hiring people. And so the other thing they were trying to do is how can they actually ensure new staff or more junior staff also has the same set of information and expertise by learning from others. And so, what they really did was by using these technologies, as I mentioned, of creating like the best interfaces, creating things like even standard operating procedures within the software, they were able to then ensure that consistency in operations. They were able to ensure that for these new users or users that are remote, they could still troubleshoot, they could still support people within the plant, and they could still also ensure that they were meeting the actual compliance and auditing regulations that they need to fulfill as well. And in the end, this comes down to, again, safety, time, and money. So that's the story regarding visualizing data. But what comes after? You have to aggregate data. You want to be able to have context in the data. You want to visualize it. But the next part of that journey is really like, how do you optimize through data? And this is really where analytics come into play. If you look at traditionally, when we talk about analytics, the expectation is that there is a data scientist, and a data scientist requires to have to know domain expertise. They have to have mathematical expertise as well as software development expertise. And that really is hard to find, and that's really challenging. And so what we're seeing now with new technologies is enabling more, having a focus more on domain expertise. And so for having like control engineers, process engineers who have domain expertise, being able to use software to bridge the gap between the mathematical expertise as well as the software development expertise. And so, and a key part of that comes to the automation software in the context of if you can do that, you can start making things better when it comes to the actual monitoring and control of your equipment and processes. And by doing that, as you can see in this picture on the right-hand side, it's all about going from things like having variation in your process, which can cause quality issues, performance issues, to actually making it as optimized as possible consistently across continued production of whatever you're creating. And yeah, so I think that's really the key piece when it comes to new analytics software that is much more easy to use, visual-based versus software development-based analytics. And so what are some of the benefits from those analytics? Let's kind of go through those. So some of those can be things like reduced variability. So as I just mentioned, you want to go from something in a process where you have a lot of variability across equipment and process to consistency. Having speed of troubleshooting. So being able to actually use analytics and visualization to do analysis of what's going on and be able to resolve it quickly. Having the ability to actually now leverage your staff most efficiently across the entire plant and enterprise. Being able to decrease the downtime. And what this really comes down to is if you think about all the optimizations you're doing, by having things like, for example, a PID loop within a controller or what you're able to do with SCADA is now you can think about how to actually optimize that to actually make it most efficient and therefore reduce the amount of time the equipment will be down due to failure. The other piece of this is when it comes to optimization. And so if you think of all these things I'm talking about in regards to like variability and downtime, a way to actually advance that beyond doing ad hoc or for a current situation is starting to build out, as I mentioned earlier, a model or a twin of good case or best case versus what's currently happening. So you can start actually seeing what the variations are to start optimizing them. And, and then lastly, I want to end off with, when you look at all this stuff, one of the critical pieces is quality of data. So, if the data you have to do all this analysis is not good, you're not going to get good results. So no matter what, you might have the best analytic in the world, but if the data is actually giving you bad data, like bad readings, and you're using that to make decisions, you will not be successful. And so another key piece of this is ensuring that you start this journey by ensuring the data that you're using to do your analytics and analysis is actually good quality data first. And so, when you look at all those things and those outcomes, in the end, at the high level, it's really about helping industrial organizations be able to get access to the data, as I mentioned at the beginning, be able to actually combine it and do analysis on it, and with the end goal about reducing variability and reducing waste within the organization and within your processes to really stay competitive and meet the needs of the customer. And again, I'll give you a quick example of this. So there's a food company that we were working with, and if you think about food and manufacturing, in the end, what it comes down to is usually you have a recipe. You take that recipe, and which is a set of materials. You want to put those materials together, which you can kind of see here on the right-hand side with the genealogy as well, and to produce something. And so they identified a place for improvement. I think this is a critical thing when it comes to analytics. You don't want to just gather all your data and analyze it, hoping to find something. They recognized that their opportunity was actually in the materials. And so they focused on optimizing how much material was used. And in this case, the material was being weighed. So they want to optimize the weight. And so what they started doing was they combined the data from what was the raw materials with what was happening within the process and the specifications of the process, with also the end result of what was the quality of the actual product being delivered. And by combining those, what they were able to do, which was fantastic, was they were able to actually reduce the waste by having optimal amount of product or material within the product. They were able to increase quality and consistency of the product for the end customer. So, for example, if it was like a juice, it would taste consistent. And the other key part was then they were also able to reduce the raw materials that they needed. So, I also want to kind of go to the one step further. So, there's the analytic piece, but, as I mentioned earlier, like as you see COVID, you see environmental changes we have been seeing happening over the last couple of years. Another key thing is, as you think as being a good citizen of the globe, is think about how to actually ensure that we're doing things in a sustainable way, in a circular way. And circular really means like, how you're able to have like a zero carbon footprint, for example. And so really to create this circular economy, a circular production, so that you have zero waste. And so everything I talked about when it comes to like the data aggregation, the visualization, the analytics, that all applies as the foundations of a circular economy and sustainability. And there's really 3 steps to that. It's like measure use of what you're using in regards to materials, find out ways to use less, and find out ways to reuse. And so if you think of this in the context of automation software, like so monitoring wages, so if you're monitoring like environmental factors, even temperatures of the actual plant, of the actual like water or steam that you're using, looking at like CO2 footprints, really looking at those kind of things. But the other kind of key thing here is adding additional data or like metrics around like, hey, what is the kind of score or the weighting of, let's say it's water on like the economy, on the social and environmental impact. And so if you combine that with those measurements, you can start getting a good understanding of overall where are the opportunities for improvements. And, and once you do that, then it's about like, okay, well, how can we now reduce our consumption? Is there things we can do? Like, for example, if it's for like water treatment, are there ways we can reduce the amount of ammonia used? Instead of using the same amount of ammonia, no matter what the season is and the amount of like waste within the water, is there ways you can actually start measuring that and figure out ways to make it optimal for what is needed based on the circumstances? And then the other key part of this is, it's not just about materials. It's about, again, also use less by making the staff and the people more sufficient. And so having things like standard operating procedures that teach people how to most efficiently do their job is another key piece of that. And then we go to reuse. And so reuse is really a critical piece here, is that if you want to reuse, and it comes back to like materials, or you want to rebuild and refurbish, you have to make sure that you're tracking the materials being used. And what is the lifespan of them? Is it something that is of high quality that you can reuse multiple times? What is the current grade of the material at the end of its first life cycle? And what is its history? Like, has it been recycled once already, or is this like now it's a virgin material that you can now recycle for the first time? And so having that tracking can really ensure that you're able to then determine how to reuse it most effectively, and also at the same time ensuring that you have a quality product and there is no defects or anything that can cause issues with whatever you're creating. And then the last piece of that is, by having that traceability as you do this reuse, you can ensure that you're adhering to any regulations when it comes to, again, like safety, quality, breakage, for example. So, as we go from now, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, another key piece of this journey is the technologies and standards to get there. And so if that comes to analytics again, or visualization, sustainability, one of the key things, so I think if it's a driver, more so originally in the software industry, but now has come into the industrial space, which is fantastic, is really focusing on standards and having open ecosystems. And what this really does is it allows you to have interoperability between multiple systems from, it could be different vendors, it could be something that you're trying to integrate with. What also helps you get, actually helps you also in regards to ensuring creating the best solutions for the users. And so some examples of that are standards when it comes to how to do like alarming, which is the ISA 18.2 standard, or how to build screens, going back to high performance with the ISA 101 standard. And again, this helps making the users most effective. It also helps in regards to safety. And then coming back to the data piece I was mentioning earlier. So when there's great standards such as REST, OPC UA, MQTT, and what they will help you is be able to aggregate data from both IT and OT systems. So REST generally is used in IT systems. So you have a REST interface to go talk to an ERP to get the data, such as like what is the product specification, to like OPC or MQTT to get data from OT systems. And this could be like a SCADA, PLC, could be a smart sensor. And really the idea here is that you use these connectivity methods to get the data all together and give context to all that data, so you can start doing things like creating the optimal screens and also doing optimizations. Another big shift that's been happening the last few years, and I've truly seen accelerated on the cloud side, is web-based technologies and cloud. And there's some big advantages here. One, with web-based technologies, as I mentioned earlier, it gives you the ability to have accessibility on multiple devices. But the other part is it's client server technology. So you can actually make the updates centrally on the server, and all the HMIs for all the operators will update. So this reduces that time for change, and really will help you in regards to then making changes to the system more effectively. And then on the cloud side, one of the big pushes here is, of course, accessibility, but even more so, it's actually about reducing infrastructure cost. By using cloud technologies, it's, now you don't have to have all that hardware within the plant, and you also don't have to be concerned about maintaining that hardware, and actually the hardware, like longevity and failures in the hardware. You can actually just kind of push that all off to cloud infrastructure and just really focus on the operations piece of what you're trying to achieve. And then lastly, coming back to the analytics side, the key thing is technologies such as, like, for example, Python. Again, in Python, there's a library called pandas. And what that library does is it allows you to be able to actually get the data that's been aggregated and create like what they call data frames, or what I call data sets. It's the idea of, you determine an issue you have, you get the right data to be able to analyze that information or to put into an analytic, and then you can have a data set for the data you want to push into the analytic, and your data set to, as a result of the analytic, that you can push into visualization for user to actually be able to act upon it. And so these are just some great technologies that will help really make the digital transformation and these changes a success. And coming back a little bit to the OPC and MQTT one, I just want to go into a little bit more details with this. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation was the blurring between the MES automation layer when it comes to data. So OPC and MQTT are some great technologies that are helping that make that happen. And how they're doing that is providing constructs such as publisher and subscriber. So what you can do now is you're able to publish the data from each source. It could be a SCADA, it could be a sensor, to a central place. And then you're allowed to allow, on the other side, people to subscribe to that data. And so, for example, say you have an IT organization who's trying to build a application for the GMs. They're able to subscribe to the data from that data hub, and they're able to visualize it without having to know about the underlying PLCs and OT systems. And so this is a way to actually democratize the data for all people within the enterprise. Some other things about these kind of technologies that are great is that they allow there to be OS independence, no more having to do things like decom port configurations. They also help in regards to, like, OPC is really great for real-time access, millisecond, sub-second access. MQTT does a really great job when you have distributed environments. And so, for example, if you're like an oil and gas company or a water company, you have multiple locations and substations, being able to aggregate that where you don't have guaranteed connectivity and low bandwidth. I think the other key piece of these technologies is the idea, again, of model and context. By having that, you're able to then really have a better understanding of how the data relates to each other. So versus seeing like a flat list of tags and trying to determine what does this tag mean and what, is it a temperature? What does it mean in the context of what piece of equipment? It's really having that model constructs as a part of these transport protocols. And then, of course, that's important also is having an audit log to ensure that there's compliance as well. All right, and with that, I just want to give a quick conclusion. So, in the end, I've been trying to share with you, it gives you a good journey of important things in regards to our industrial space. And that comes back to the challenges we're facing when it comes to aggregating data, visualizing data, being able to then optimize that data, and also really think in the context of, the global world and sustainability and circularity. And so, hopefully we can see from all this information that by leveraging this automation software, and the new technologies that are coming into place and solutions, you can really achieve these goals of safely being able to do your production and operations, being able to be sustainable, and really being able to adapt in this changing world. And with that, I'll hand it back to Gary.
Fantastic, thank you. And if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll pop my screen back up. All right. Perfect. Well, that was fantastic information, Ranbir. Thanks so much for taking us through that. It was very insightful, but to our attendees out there, please don't leave us just yet. It's time for the question and answer portion of the session, which will be starting momentarily. This Q&A session will become part of the archive presentation. To participate live, just click the Join Now button in the next section. These details can also be found in the Additional Resources tab on the left-hand side of your screen. Please submit your questions using the Zoom question and answer interface. So we will start that in just a moment. Thanks, everyone. Wow, thank you for all the great questions, everybody. And thanks again to our speaker, Ranbir Saini, for sharing his time, insight, and expertise.
Thank you.
Now that we're just about done here, we do want to hear how we did. An exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it because we use this information to help improve our future webcasts. On behalf of CFE Media and today's sponsors, thanks for attending, and we'll see you next time. And that, my friend, is it.
Great, thank you.
How do you feel?
I was good, other than I got surprised by animations I didn't know were there. So like I think when Bernard moved that one, the order of the bullets, he didn't realize he had put animations on it. So I was hopping around, but I think I did okay even with that situation. Because if anything, it maybe made the people be more attentive because it was jumping around like bottom, top, left, right. But
Right.
hopefully it was okay. It wasn't too jerky in that regard.
Animations are always tricky like that. I can say, never having seen you run through this before, I was watching the whole thing. I didn't see anything that would have surprised me as an audience member.
Okay, great.
So Nita, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but like I said, it all looked clean to me.
Great.
Yeah, no, you're a natural in there.
You really did a fantastic job. You were, I don't say I pride myself. I do this a lot. And you were much cleaner than I was. You did a terrific job. Really, really
Thank
good.
you. I really appreciate that.
Well presented. Yeah. I usually at the end of this, I'm like, well, we should redo this and redo this.
Yeah.
I got nothing for you. You did a great job.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for the help, Gary. And
Sure.
so one question for you.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording now.
Oh, yeah.